it also breaks my heart in thinking about, more than 50% of people end up in divorce.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you take a step back from your career for your family and you end up in divorce. Now, a lot of times, and this isn't one on divorce, but, you may get spousal support and things like that. But still, long term, typically it's not for your life, and long term, did you hurt the trajectory of your career? And now you're kind of starting over in your career and that from that perspective.
Exactly.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast. Are you curious about the financial aspects of leaving the workforce to be a stay-at-home parent? I'm Shauna Theriel, and today I'm joined by Michaela Dowdy. Each week, we bring you practical advice on retirement, investing, and planning for your financial future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Let's get started.
Hey, Shauna.
How are you this morning?
Good. Can't complain.
Yeah.
I mean, the girls are taking over the podcast yet again.
I love it. We have the stay-at-home parent equation.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Well, and about this time, the kids are back in school now, not mid-August. So
yes,
traffic is crazy again, and all the things. So
yes,
back to school.
All the kids are headed back to school. Thank goodness. In some ways, I'm sure for a lot of parents out there.
Yes.
They're ready to send them back for 8 hours a day.
Yes. Because I remember, speaking of stay at home. So obviously when my girls are 18, 17 and 12, when they were little, it was always so hard because it's like, you'd have to find daycare, or if they were in elementary school, then it was like, you'd have to find something for summer stuff, clubs and camps and all of that. So I guess it does make it easier if you're a stay-at-home parent to be able to, be there and not have to worry and have summers off with them. So It's one of the bonuses of it.
Definitely.
So we're going to talk about the financial implications, though, of being a stay-at-home parent. And, really, we're going to talk about the finances, but it really is more of what works better for your family as well.
Exactly. And I mean, just before this podcast, I did look up just some statistics.
Oh.
And one of them I noticed on a Pew Research study, they said that 18% of parents now are stay-at-home parents.
Do you think that happened after COVID, or did they mention that?
I feel it didn't say there was necessarily a spike after COVID.
Interesting.
Because in all honesty, I think they had even actually seen a decline in stay-at-home parents for a while.
After being stuck in your home with the kids for so long.
Yeah. And
you're
now
do this. No.
People are now back to being closer to stay-at-home parents. So the 18% is kind of where the trajectory is now.
So 18%. Okay. That's still a small percentage to what it used to be years and years ago.
Yes, exactly.
But I just feel with the cost of everything, you almost need dual incomes anyway.
Exactly. And I think that's the reason we've seen the fall off, of course, of people, it not being as traditional now to have a spouse that stays at home.
Yeah. So what, we obviously have a lot of clients here, and, some of them stay home, some of them work. And just from a financial standpoint, what is the immediate trade-off? What are the things to consider there? There's so much to consider, actually. But
so much to consider.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, I feel the most immediate thing is, you're having that loss of income if that spouse was working previously in your marriage. And so that's a huge, proponent potentially sometimes of, your budget has to shift because now you're going to one income instead of having two incomes.
Yeah.
So that's something that's big to consider. And then there's also, looking at there's a lot of that reduction in expenses though, which is typically why you're making that choice, is that those expenses have just decided to, and have started to outweigh what one is, bringing in, what one of the spouses could be bringing in. And when you do the math, it's well, if one spouse is making the $40,000, but yet you're having to spend $40,000 a year on daycare and childcare costs and all these different things that you're having to pay, a babysitter, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then it just becomes, well, then why would I not just, as a parent, take time off and spend those years with my children while they're home?
Yeah.
Instead of, going into the workforce just to pay for someone else to watch my child in childcare.
Yeah, no, totally. And that you hit the nail on the head there, because it really is, if you can do it financially, it really is, a personal decision as well, what's best for your family. Cause being a mom of 3 girls, you can't get that time back, and I worked while they were little. But it was the financial, it was the consideration, all the other things. And it was funny, I always say this and we talk about it all the time, especially with new parents. I remember paying the childcare and the diapers and all the things.
Yes.
And I was like, and it's so expensive. It really is expensive. And it's like, usually you're having kids like at the beginning of your career when you're like, okay, you have competing things here. It's like, so you're trying to, work your way up in the workforce potentially. And it's maybe newly in your marriage and, maybe you just graduated college and a few years after that's when you're having kids. And so it is like competing forces. And so sometimes you get to stay home and sometimes you don't. Depends on the finance. But I can tell you now that I have kids that are driving and that have insurance and they're in college, I miss childcare expenses.
I'm sure.
It's like all the things now. They're way more expensive, which is like, it's kind of like you progress in your career and like, you ramp up and it gets to the point where it's like you grow into the expenses, if you will.
Yes.
But I'm telling you, the expense of childcare, which it is expensive. I'm not, proportionately it is, but that is nothing compared to what it is later.
Yes.
At least that's what I feel.
Yeah. No, I think most parents, I feel that way. Like even the ones we have that come in that are clients talking about childcare and they're just like, it's so expensive. Or it's like they get to college and they're like, I thought they were expensive before. Same boat as you, you know?
Yes.
It's like, I just thought we were like barely touching the cusp of
and
it all.
And the insurance and all, it's crazy. It's, just thinking about all the things. So, it's definitely, but the other things to think about is like commuting expenses and, you really have to weigh out, as far as the lost income, what truly is the differential if you're going to save expenses versus lose that income.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's also, even looking at something that we have listed on here too is like work-related expenses.
Yeah.
Even just like I know even just being here, like I'll tend to eat out more or whatever it may be while, you're at the office. A lot of people have that typical, oh, well, if I'm, not at home, then, oh, dang it, I forgot to, pack a lunch. Then I guess I'm just going to go buy something today. And then that's like an added cost. Of course, that's a small one.
Sure.
But it's just something there that like those small things do add up. And it is something that definitely, those more work-related expenses also come into play here too, in addition to the childcare and the transportation costs and all of that.
Well, and the biggest thing, when we're running numbers too, when you and I are sitting down with a client and saying, okay, it's thinking about all those hidden costs.
Yes.
Like contributing to retirement accounts. So if you're taking away the income, maybe you don't have that expense any longer, but you're taking away the income, but maybe you were able to defer some to a 401k or do some retirement contributions. That's one thing to think about too, because maybe you'll be saving less for retirement.
Exactly.
And so, and then the Social Security benefits as well. So, contributing to Social Security. So, you can get spousal in the future potentially, but you have to pay in enough quarters to be able to get benefits and all of that as well. So thinking about the Social Security benefits, not that we're trying to, plan to say, our retirement's based on Social Security, but it's a portion of it. It helps.
No, definitely. It's a huge portion potentially for some people, or it's, just a great little cherry on top for others, but it is still something that you definitely want to have available to you. Right. Should the time come, you do want to have that available as a support system, as a cash flow there as well. And you don't want to have to like lose that in, potential retirement scenarios because of you stepped away from the workforce at any point. But it is something that, of course, there is, times that you can kind of go back into the workforce later, or even, like we're saying with spousal as well. So there's that balance. And then just even with those retirement contributions, like you were talking about, it is something that hopefully you can save elsewhere. Maybe it is you're having that joint brokerage account, or you're, doing other savings.
Spousal IRA.
Yes, spousal IRA. Yeah. Yes, of course. And so there are a lot of areas you could still save, but definitely you're not getting that pre-tax contribution or even employer match anymore.
Right.
That can be so great and so huge, especially if you're early on in your career. Because I feel like a lot of people, that's kind of, early on, it's like, I'm going to save to the employer match. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe that's 6%. But now it's like, really, that's 12% of my salary that's going in, which is huge in those early years. And then you're going to have the time value of money on that, which is great.
The biggest thing is the compounding, because you can save later and step away, and you can aggressively save, later, but you can't get that time value compounding back.
Exactly.
So that compounding is huge, because then, theoretically and financially, you have to save less to get the same amount versus saving more later, because you have to make up time almost.
Definitely.
And sometimes you can and sometimes you can't.
Yeah.
The other thing, it's like, I think about, obviously health insurance, thinking about that, are you all going to be on the same plan with your spouse? And this can be husband or wife, or, significant other. So it's not just mom staying home, or, it could be dads too, or significant other. So it's really anyone. So looking at the health insurance cost there too, some employers will help pay for spouse, some don't. So it's like, if you're both employed and you each work for an employer that pays for your healthcare costs, that's another expense that if you leave, then you may have to be added to your spouse's coverage, and then maybe pay a premium there.
Definitely. Or it could even be that, if you were getting it through your prior employer and now, of course, you don't have access, and those spousal coverages, like you're saying, that's sometimes it can be an extensive premium.
Yeah.
Like, it can be very, $500 a month, even if you're in your 20s, and, you're like, oh, it shouldn't be that bad because expenses are not that much for a 20-year-old. And it's like, no, like it can still be pretty substantial on a monthly basis, especially if you're coming from an employer where it was already like included in your, overall like package for your employment.
Yeah.
And so to go from not spending that $500 to now having to spend it, or to even go on the private market and likely spend even more than that on a monthly basis, can definitely be a larger, cash flow drag that isn't anticipated by a lot of individuals, I feel like. Before we get back into the episode, have you ever wondered why annuities keep coming up as a recommended investment? While they're often pitched as a way to reduce risk and secure your future, annuities frequently benefit the salesperson more than the investor. Download our free guide, Buyer Beware: Why Do They Keep Trying to Sell You That Annuity? At wiserinvestor.com/guides. Now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah. So not only the income loss, maybe deferral, 401k match, then medical expenses, that's a lot right there. But also, and this may be like for potentially staying at home as well, looking at the tax consequences.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, if my 40 or 50,000 or 100 or whatever my salary is, or that spouse, it's bumping it up to the next tax bracket.
Yeah.
You may be saving money on taxes too there. So you do have to run those numbers. And that's some that people don't think about, because that could save tax money as well.
No, definitely could.
So, that could bump you into a lower tax bracket, which, as long as you can I still want you to be able to save to retirement. I still want you to be able to live, and be able to do the things you want to do, and hopefully save for college and all these things. There's just so many competing forces so early in your career.
Exactly. And I feel like a majority of the time, I think, even when we're talking about the stay-at-home equation, I feel like a lot of times it is, at the beginning that, first 5 years before they go to like elementary school, like the kids do. Then at that point, I feel like you do start to see, stay-at-home moms start to pick up, or not even moms, but just parents, start to pick up maybe a part-time job when all the kids are in school, or, start to find that balance between still bringing in an income once the kids are there, but then, also balancing that also, still stay at home kind of parent lifestyle as well.
Sure.
For the needs of the family.
Sure. And, something that I thought about too was just your career trajectory. What is it you're wanting to do long term? So sometimes in some careers, some you can step out and come right back in. And again, this is a personal decision, and, jobs change all the time, and you can change your career, and, sometimes you find what you're meant to do in those moments, and it changes. There's so many blessings that you don't know, but so I'm not saying not to do it, but, you do want to understand the impact on your career. If you have to have a certain amount of hours in, or, just with technology changing and everything, are you going to progress in your career like you're wanting to? That's where it's so hard. It's like, it's almost backwards. We're supposed to make these decisions as young adults. Like I'm having kids teenagers right now navigate, what are we going to do the rest of our lives? And they're like 18 and 17, it's like, how do you decide something so huge when, and then it's, you start having kids and it's like, okay, you're trying to like figure out the trajectory of your career, but also being a parent at the same time because you can't get that time back. And it's like, by the time it's all said and done, we have all this time and it's like, what did you do with your time when you were there? And do you have enough resources now? So it's all these competing things, which can feel very overwhelming. And so that's where it's like, okay, if we just run the numbers though, what's feasible and what works, but then it also breaks my heart in thinking about, more than 50% of people end up in divorce.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you take a step back from your career for your family and you end up in divorce. Now, a lot of times, and this isn't one on divorce, but, you may get spousal support and things like that. But still, long term, typically it's not for your life, and long term, did you hurt the trajectory of your career? And now you're kind of starting over in your career and that from that perspective.
Exactly. Yes.
So that's really hard too.
Yeah. And I feel like we see that a lot.
Yes.
Especially here recently. I think it's just been a growing navigating time that we have to go through with planning for a lot of clients.
Right.
Is okay, now I'm back to what can feel like square one in some ways after a divorce, especially if you're someone that has, that stepped away from the workforce and then is now, in that position of, okay, it's a start over, which in some ways is great. I think in some ways for people, they like take it with like stride. They're like, yes, get to start over,
reinvent
fresh,
yourself,
reinvent myself. Yeah. Exactly. But I mean, again, not to make this about divorce at all, but it is something that you do see. And of course, I mean, I feel like don't want to focus on the negatives of being a stay-at-home parent, but it is something to consider for sure. Of, that expectation and that difference that you're going to see should anything happen.
And then feeling like maybe like you're stuck a little bit because you're like, oh, I don't feel like I have an exit point, Exactly. I mean, not that you want to plan for that way. And we can't, plan to live in fear, but it's like, we do plan as planners for the unexpected, life insurance, disability insurance, divorce, like you have to think about those things.
Exactly.
And it's like, if this does happen, what is the impact to you overall? Are you meeting your personal intrinsic goals that you're wanting to do, for a short period of time? And some of it, maybe you want to be, closer to your kids and be able to do that. So, that maybe is one of your personal goals. So, just deciding all that is really, really hard. Another financial thing I kind of just mentioned, life and disability.
Yes. Which is huge, especially if you're a stay-at-home partner, and it's making sure that the person that is working, as well as yourself as the stay-at-home partner, have coverage. I think a lot of times we see clients come in where it's just the working spouse that has coverage because it's provided by the employer. They're like, oh, this is fine. This is great.
Many times that's not enough. It's
Correct.
Great that the employer helps, but usually that's not enough insurance, especially for a sole income home.
Exactly. Yes. And you need more, especially if you're a sole income home. I mean, just like something that we don't even have listed here, but even having, if you're a single income home, then you want to have a higher emergency savings as well.
Yeah.
Just making sure that that's also there as a, making sure that your family would be okay if there was an event that you lost your job for any reason. But to go back to, life and disability insurance here, I think a lot of times we do see clients that come in, they just don't have enough insurance coverage to begin with, as the sole provider. But then also there's no coverage on the partner that's a stay-at-home partner.
Right.
And a lot of times it's because like, well, I don't bring any income into the family, but it's like, well, if you actually broke down though, what you're doing for the family.
Yeah.
And especially like for our clients, I mean, not to make it about pilots either, but for our pilot clients, they could be gone 15 days out of the month, if not longer. And if they don't have childcare, they can't fly trips.
Right.
Like, who's going to take care of your kid?
Can't bring your kid to work day.
No.
It doesn't work that way.
My 9-year-old sits in first class.
Yeah, exactly.
No, literally. But it's one of those where you have to have that coverage put into place, and you want to make sure that you are providing care in that way of like giving the ability that even if the stay-at-home parent, if something happened to them, you want to make sure that your family's protected. Even I was looking at a study on Forbes, they had that about like for the labor that a stay-at-home parent does, that there was a study that they did that it was about $4,500 a month.
Wow. Well, I mean, and now I was thinking that thing. It's like we're saying stay at home mom or stay at home parent. And it's like stay at home parent. And, I mean, we all know that that's like a 24-hour job.
Yes.
So it's not like, they do a lot of work for sure.
do.
But if you think about that, the childcare needed and driving back and forth to activities or school or all those things. And even just taking like a step back for a minute, if you lost your loved one, just to like regroup, have that time, having some money to like help you during that time. If you need to take a leave of absence or something, it depends on your work. Because that's a lot to comfort your children and yourself and go through losing your spouse.
Exactly.
Or significant other.
Yes. And to have it to where you're not having to worry financially would be huge. And to just be able to sit there and like wrestle with your grief in a way and like be with your children and like focus on family during that time and 100%. Know that you can take a step back and not that, oh, well, if I take a step back, then we won't have, food on the table like that. That would just be, very extreme circumstance there. But, still you want to make sure that that income is coming in or that there is a stipulation for it or provisions in place.
And honestly, statistically, you're more apt to become disabled than pass away typically when you're young. And so, we like to sell for life insurance with term insurance. We generally don't use whole life or anything like that. Those are for specific things, but for something like that, term life insurance. And then the disability insurance is a big thing too, like you mentioned, just making sure, because typically if you become disabled, now you have a loss of income, but then maybe your expenses are even higher because you're taking care of someone who may not be healthy.
Yeah.
So it's like, it could be like a double, could be a loss of income and then increased expenses on top of that. So that could be harder. There's always options though. The other one could get a job, et cetera. But, just making sure that we can't what if everything, but have a plan in place for all of those things, And so really it's not, like we mentioned, it's really not just about numbers, although the numbers, need to be run. Truly looking at the numbers, understanding the emotions around it, understanding what could happen with having a sole income, death, disability, divorce. Then, and sometimes it's, you have these little babies and these toddlers and they need you. Yes. And as they get older, they still need you, even though it seems like they don't. But just the increase of expense of raising a child is it's huge, and so just making sure that you're saving enough for your retirement and your future, but also helping them too. And sometimes we have to work to make both work.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I know me being a mom, but also just working with so many individuals throughout my career, none of them want to be a burden to their children. And so, do you take time now? If you have to choose, do you take time now with them and then in turn not save enough and then they're taking care of you in the future? It's kind of like, maybe it depends, but that's not really what we try to plan for. We try to plan for both, in all of it. So running numbers is very, very important in choosing your lifestyle. We could run numbers for them. Yeah. Could schedule with Michaela or I just to look at running a plan and running numbers and seeing, and, we can do different scenarios that says, how can we do all these things and still meet your goals? So
exactly. And I think it's like building that vision for yourself. I think we talk about vision a lot at Wiser, and it's something that it is important of. You do have goals and you do have vision, and whether it's you want to stay home with your kids while they're young, or you want to, stay home with your kids the duration of while they're at your home, and, run the family unit and have the, very traditional approach of, years past of, one spouse works and one stays at home, then you could definitely do that. And figuring out how that works for your family and what does that look like to meet all of your goals. Like you're saying, Shauna, of, meeting not only the short-term goal here of I want to stay home with my children, but also meeting that long-term goal of one day you want to retire and be able to provide for yourself. And I think that's something that 100% that we do every day, whether it's a stay-at-home parent or not. Yeah. That's exactly what we're doing, is meeting those visions and meeting those goals.
Yeah. And we've seen so many times where they just take a step back for a shorter period of time and then go back in the workforce. And a lot of professions, you can do that, and understandably. And so it's really whatever you want to craft and whatever you want to create and whatever your goals are.
Exactly.
So it's exciting.
It is.
Well, we have a couple of different education videos in the show notes. Why every parent should consider a Roth IRA for their child. Talking about a Greenlight debit card from 2024, and then another podcast episode, buying a home in the best school district, what you need to know. That's a good one to look at. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about Wiser Wealth Management or want to schedule a consultation to meet with one of us, Michaela or I or Casey, please, you can do so by going to wiserinvestor.com or by clicking the link in the episode notes. See you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This podcast is strictly for informational purposes only and is not to be considered as investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any financial products, securities, digital assets, or any other investment vehicles, or a basis to make any financial decisions. Wiser Wealth Management Incorporated is a registered investor advisor with the SEC. The host and/or guests may personally own securities, digital assets, or other investment vehicles mentioned on this podcast. Neither the host nor guests of the show are compensated for their participation, and no referral fees are paid to or received by any host or guest for clients, listeners, or similar interests. Investments involve risk, and unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor, tax professional, insurance professional, and/or legal professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.